And I said I'll record it, and now we're starting now. We'll be half recorded. Oh right. So yeah, like so with the LA thing with the tragedy, it's like okay, it's a tragedy. We can't do anything about it. That's just the way it is. We didn't have that resignation with 9/11 because we played it as okay, this is just going to be like 1942 and Japan, and we're going to go to war with whoever did this, and we're going to crush them like we did with the Japanese, and the world will be a better place afterwards. Now, probably looking back 20 years later, and what a piss poor job we did in Afghanistan. I think it probably is given more toward tragic narratives, but at least in the moment of it, you had W trying to be the hero, and this is part of the problem with COVID too that you're seeing. So I think you're right, Mary, that at least a large portion of the nation are playing this as tragedy because of the bumbling government, right? The slow response, the lack of PPE, et cetera, et cetera. It's this is just another shitty thing that's happened to America now, and we're a bunch of losers all of a sudden. But another way of putting this is politicians. I think Rahm Emanuel's been credited with this. He was Obama's chief of staff for a while. I don't know if it's really his. I think it goes back a lot further. But the politicians put it as don't never waste a good crisis, or every good crisis is an opportunity. And the opportunity there is to cast the politicians as heroic, and clearly that's the effort that Trump is engaged in at this point. So the way he's framing the coronavirus response is that really for him, it's like specifically him, it's this very kind of egotistical thing. He is the hero who has conquered the coronavirus, and he's preparing to save the economy, and everything will be wonderful. And there are, you can, if you wade into the Twitter cesspool, there are people who are really trying to push that. Somebody was saying, we're going to have a greater economy by November than we had to begin with, and President Trump is going to ride this wave that he's created. Like, whoa, okay. But again, it might be a little bit reductionist, but again, I think we at least if we use these terms that Jacobs is giving us, we can see that kind of that interplay or the confrontation of tragic with romantic narrative. The one more thing, sorry. Some people are trying to play the romantic narrative into COVID-19 by casting first responders, nurses, doctors as heroes, right? So this is not just a tragic thing, but it's a thing that we emerge from stronger because there are these heroes in our society that can bring us to a new paradise or something like that. Okay, long rant, but good question.
So we kind of answered my third question in there. But my independent study right now is race and ethnicity. So we've been doing a lot of like structural racism and stuff like that. So I was wondering if you guys think in terms of race relations, we're better now than we are at points of like 1965 and 1992. And I just want to note that like specifically 1965 is like peak peak to ending times of like the civil rights movement. And then 1992 was really not that long ago. But these are both situations that happened very similarly So do you guys think we're better off as a country today, racially today, than we were at that point?
I mean, to a point, I think yes, but then also to a point, no, because I we saw the Ferguson, Missouri, what do you call it, the riots that happened
Mhm.
there a while back ago. I remember that all over the news. Um, but pretty much racism has, and I think it will always be there. I don't think it will ever go away, but I definitely think we have um come closer together, I guess I'm trying to say. But um yeah, I think there's two sides of it.
I feel like we have more people um, fighting for racial equality, but I feel like there's still so much racial like structural racism and institutional racism. Like, I mean, we wouldn't have the Black Lives Matter movement if there wasn't, you know? Like, and there's so much like hate against like racial discrimination still, but I definitely think that there's like more people that are acknowledging it and fighting towards like making equality for people, but we definitely still have so many problems.
Yeah, I would agree. I think structurally, it's very, very similar, but socially, it's getting a bit better. Just because you can see obviously there are more inclusive areas, but structurally and like power wise, I don't I don't think it's that much better, like at all.
Yeah, and I think the statistics kind of bear you out there too. So when we do measures of things like, well, this is a problem. So social distancing, right? Social distancing is a sociological term, not just a thing you do during the coronavirus. But so these measures that we have of social distance, which means uh, do you have friends of another race or ethnicity? Would you be happy to be neighbors with somebody of another ethnicity? That sort of thing. That has pretty consistently, slowly but consistently been improving. But like you said, the structural stuff and the specifically urban dimension here. Right. So, like, African Americans stuck in inner cities, are still, just about the worst off people in America. Right. And that is, due to all kinds of structural and institutional problems. And of course, right, as you said, Jake, during Ferguson, we could certainly see that. Baltimore, we could see that, and at at any time, I think we're two steps away from another riot potentially. Just depending on how egregious police behavior is in these places. And I also kind of wanted to kind of point out, adjacent to a point you were making, Joelle, about police reforms, right? So they did, they did have like some like blue ribbon commission or whatever to come together to say like, well, how can we fix the LA Police Department and blah blah blah, and get more into community policing. But I think it was, I'd have to look it up, but within a year or two after Jacobs wrote this article, so sometime in the early 2000s, they did a major investigation of a particular division within the LA police, the Rampart division, and found that they were like, even more kind of horribly and systemically racist than we thought. That really those reforms of the '90s didn't do much at all to help the situation.
Yeah, I don't have anything else.
No, that was great. Um, I I do. I mean, I do think OJ is somehow important in here. I'm not, I'm not quite sure. It seems like it's a little tacked on for Jacobs as well. And I think it's kind of where he's saying, what does he say about OJ?
I just didn't think it was important enough to put in the presentation.
Yeah, that's fine. I guess it really just kind of continues the same kind of a narrative, that there is this intractable or unbridgeable divide between blacks and whites, in LA specifically, in America in general, and we see that through the lens of the O.J. Simpson trial, where blacks thought his acquittal was justice, and he doesn't. I mean, it's also with all these things, it's so. I mean, yeah, obviously, I want you to extract the general lessons as always, so that and again, that the general lesson, you pretty nailed it pretty well. That we have a tendency to have certain kinds of genres that we want to read social narratives through, and I'm not convinced. Certainly that Jacobs is exhaustive in his list, or really saying he almost comes down to it's either tragedy or it's romance. I'm like, he mentions things can be irony and things can be comedy. I mean, there's a lot of different genres out there, so it may not be super healthy to divide it just into tragedy and romance. But the thing is, with the specificity of it, I mean, he didn't quite capture the real. I mean, to me, the real linchpin in the OJ trial, and what could make it. I think what made it really available for Black people to perceive as as a vindication was that the I don't know if he was the arresting officer, but one of the investigating officers, Mark Furman, who by the way has had a somewhat successful career afterwards as being a Fox News analyst or something like that. He was a real deep and avowed racist, and all this came out during the trial. And so it was funny that it wasn't so much. I think what he's suggesting is that it was a vindication that maybe a Black man can get a fair trial in America. I'm not sure. I think that's a reductionist way of seeing it. I think it was more that it was a vindication of the position that the LA police are racists, and of course, LA is just a, one example of the culture, the nation in general. All the cops are racists, right? And rather than saying OJ didn't do it, which I'm not sure that all that many people believe, maybe they did, maybe they do, but saying that OJ shouldn't have been convicted because those were racist cops who were railroading him from the beginning, and that's it's a subtle difference, but I think it's an important difference. It's not just OJ is innocent, it's that the system is stacked, and this is a somewhat of an unstacking of the system, and so it's justice in a kind of a broader sense, and and that is a real kind of I think perception of what counts as justice in America. It should be a fair trial, getting a fair shake. Even if you did it, if the evidence is polluted, then you should be acquitted. All right. And what? Yeah, I mean, so yeah, just kind of that general idea about romance as the balance to genre, and remember to frame this kind of in those power terms a bit. So who gets to make these distinctions is the media. Oh God, the Zamora. Oh no. Oh yeah, because his kids live here, right? So weird. Um, uh, oh man, we should have him to class sometime, right? He's not doing much. Um, um, sorry, where was it? Tragedy, romance. Oh, right, the power thing. The media, and this is going back now too. So it's a little. We live in a more fractured media environment, so you can see, where Jacobs was like, I'm going to look at the ABC News and the New York Times and the LA Times and one or two others, where there was this, really kind of big consolidated media apparatus. Now we have more fracturing, so there may be less consolidated power than there was then, and like we were saying about the COVID narratives, right? So some of this may be springing up more organically, but certainly in 2000 or in the 90s, you could say like what the media decides, how the media decides to tell the story, is going to have a really drastic impact on people's perceptions of things, right? So telling it as a tragedy, and he does have some interesting stuff in there, right? So the suggestion that this wasn't inevitable because you had so in the early stages on this like second page here on 222, where you have Ted Koppel, who was a very this was ABC's Nightline, which some large fraction of the country watched in those days. Ted Koppel was painting gang members as sympathetic figures, as figures who had like subtle narratives and understandings of this sort of thing. And so there was this possibility of romance, but the media chose the kind of the easier tragic story to tell it. Would that happen nowadays? I'm not so sure. And again, looking at COVID, the fact that we get different narratives about these things, it's interesting, right? So the media is not as unified, and but what that also means is that the media can sort of play on the divisions in society to potentially exacerbate those divisions. So you have the right-wing media pushing the romantic hero narrative of Trump is great and everything's going to be fine, versus the more mainstream media pushing the more at least potentially tragic narrative that the government messed up and this is just a dysfunctional society kind of thing. And just one other thing I think was important that Jacobs brings up is there's almost a hope there, I think, that he's saying that we should have so what is it? He says genre balance on 236, right? So balance, we should always, at least be open to the possibility that we can tell these stories both through a tragic narrative and a romantic narrative. Somewhere in there, he, and when some of this gets weird, right? He talks about like Nietzsche and, myth being, liberating people from the mundane and so, I don't know about that, but But well, it's interesting to bring up Nietzsche actually because Hitler was a big fan of Nietzsche, right? Going back to those romantic myths, I mean, there's the specific problem with Nietzsche and Hitler is that they can be used to push a narrative that a particular ethnic group is the hero or is the culture bearing class, and that can really exacerbate ethnic divisions. But he also, I think, rightly points out that romance can drive authoritarianism, fascism in general. If you see your leaders as being heroes, then you'll excuse all kinds of really bad behavior from them. And clearly, I think that's what a number of Trump's supporters do. It's like he can do no wrong because he is this hero who is making America great again. And clearly, we saw that with Hitler. We see that, with the Venezuelan dude who died, whose name I can never remember. Not Maduro, but whoever, Chavez, Hugo Chavez, in Venezuela. Really kind of eroded civil liberties, but he sold this particular version of socialism that, while it was working, people were really happy to go along with because they're like, oh, Hugo Chavez, he's the hero, he's liberating us from the evil capitalists of the global north. So he has some secret police who beat the shit out of people, but that's okay, right? Because he's the hero, and that's all right. I guess that's why Jacobs advocates for genre balance. Again, I'm not sure that that's what we need, but I think that more general lesson that we tend to use these kind of what he calls genres, right? Or we can narratives is also a common word in the lit out there now. We use these narratives to understand history, but present history as well. And so we see ourselves. And clearly with COVID, we're doing this right now too. Is like, is this going to be, a tragedy like The Walking Dead or something like that? And I've seen some fun memes about that too. It's really like the future traveler who comes back and he's like, oh shit, this is 2020, and he's like, have the dead reanimated yet? We could kind of be fearful of that. Or we can put it in the narrative of we've come together as a nation before and we'll beat this thing like a blah blah blah. So that okay. Are there questions? We're looking good. Okay, so thanks for the presentation, Joelle. On Monday, looking ahead here, we've got two more articles we're reading next week, right? So Jake, you've got variety and atypicality in cultural consumption. Yeah, okay. And then Mary on Wednesday with musical taste, and that's more again this almost micro level deployment of power and sort of habitus stuff that really isn't so much in the chapter, so you won't have that so much to compare to. But if you can just kind of maybe go look back a little bit at the stuff about Bourdieu and habitus that's in briefly in the textbook, or there was also what that the Ferguson could be a bit of a comparison there as well, which he talked about French culinary traditions. Okay, so Mary, I'll do some independent study stuff with you. Joelle, Jacob, unless you got other things, I'll see you on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. We're starting to open up Florida again.
That's scary.
Well, yeah, I don't know.